Well, several weeks ago, I started, I guess, what ends up being a series about these I am sayings of Jesus. John 6:35, when Jesus fed the 5,000, he made the claim, I am the bread of life. And then in John 8, he was at the Feast of Tabernacles, and on that occasion, he said, I am the light of the world. And tradition says that they had lamps that they would light during that feast. And here is Jesus making the claim to be the light of the world. And then in John 10, he said, I am the door and I am the good shepherd. And we talked about that saying. And then recently, John 11, verse 25, when Jesus went to the tomb of Lazarus, he made the statement that I am the resurrection and the life. Well, there are two other I am sayings in the Gospel of John, and I want to look at the next to the last of those this morning. And that is John 14 and 6. Maybe the most familiar of all of these sayings. I am the way, the truth, and the life. What I would like to consider with you for a short time this morning is to look at the setting in which this is said. I think that's always important, particularly in John's gospel, because, as we've said, there are things that Jesus does that lead up to his saying what he does. And then we'll consider what this claim is, what it means, what its ramifications are, at least look briefly at that. And then we'll consider the proof that Jesus gave. As I said, on other occasions, he did a sign or a miracle. What did he do on this occasion? What did he say? So if you'll look with me in John chapter 14, actually we'll back up to chapter 13, because the setting for this particular saying is this Passover meal that Jesus eats with his apostles. And it is at this Passover meal, as John records it in chapter 13, that Jesus eats this meal with them. He washes their feet, and then he tells Judas he needs to go and do what he has planned to do, that is, to betray him. And so as Judas leaves, we pick up in verse 31, and it says, when he had gone out, Jesus said, now is the Son of Man glorified, and God is glorified in him. So now he turns his attention to those apostles who are left, and he says, it has come time for the Son of Man to glorify God. Now, of course, we know after the fact that what he's talking about is his death, then his burial, then his resurrection. God is going to be glorified because that is God's plan, and Jesus has come to carry it out. But you can understand and appreciate that the apostles would not really understand all that's going on. And so in verse 33, Jesus continues, little children, yet a little while I'm with you. You will seek me, and just as I said to the Jews, so now I also say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. Now, what's he talking about here? Well, Peter is wondering the same thing. In fact, verse 36, Peter asked, Lord, where are you going? Well, what is this that you have in mind? And Jesus answers in verse 36, where I am going, you cannot follow me now, but you will follow afterward. Now, as I suggest, all of this is understood after the fact, because we know what happened. We know what unfolded, but the apostles did not know at that point in time. And so it seems that Jesus tries to discourage or dampen down any kind of impetuous claims, especially that Peter might be prone to make. Peter was not going to follow. Now was not the time for him to die, but it was the time for Jesus to die. Jesus was that Lamb of God, and it was only him that, having lived the life that he lived, could suffer as a perfect sacrifice for the sins of the world. As such, he was going to glorify the Father because he was going to fulfill his eternal purpose of salvation for all mankind. And yet Jesus made it clear that yes, Peter would follow later. He would follow in his death, and he would share in his glory. Well, Peter protests. Look at verse 36. He was unwilling to wait. He said, Lord, why can I not follow you now? And then he proclaimed in verse 37, I will lay down my life for you. And of course, we know what happened to Peter. Jesus foretold that he would deny him. And it's easy to judge Peter rather harshly, yet I think his impatience on this occasion was really just a confused devotion. I think Peter was sincere in what he was saying, and yet he shows his ignorance, particularly about human weakness, particularly about his own weakness. He didn't fully comprehend what it was that he would be up against. And so his words are somewhat ironic. I will lay down my life for you. Jesus responds in verse 38, will you lay down your life for me? Truly, truly, I say to you, the rooster will not crow till you have denied me 3 times. The fact is, who was getting ready to lay down their life for whom? It was Jesus that was ready for that occasion. Now, Peter spoke better than he knew. It would be about 3 decades later that tradition says Peter did give up his life. He was executed as an apostle. He was martyred for the cause of Christ. And so indeed, he followed the example of his master. He displayed a similar kind of love for his brothers and sisters. But on this occasion, at this point in time, Jesus is trying to prepare him, and really the other apostles. And I think it's striking that even though Jesus is headed for the cross, he is deeply disturbed in his spirit and in his mind, yet he has the presence of mind to speak words of comfort and instruction to his apostles. Now, if you go right on into chapter 14, without that chapter break, we are familiar with verse 1. But Jesus just continues, let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. And then he tells them, I'm going to prepare a place for you. In my Father's house, I'll come again so that you can be with me. And then verse 4, and you know the way to where I am going. Now that raises a question in Thomas's mind. And Thomas wants an answer. How can we know the way? And then that response of Jesus, verse 6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. I want to suggest, before we move on, that we put ourselves in the apostles' place. Now, no, we're not apostles. But I want you to think of them sitting in that room, having eaten that meal together. They are committed to following their Lord, wherever that takes them. Here we are this morning, we're sitting in a room together, and we have committed ourselves to following our Lord. They had been following him for some 3 years. And despite the fact that he had spent that time with him and instructed them and helped them and encouraged them and corrected them, they didn't understand it all. And I would suggest that the same is true for us. We may have been following our Lord for 10 years, 20 years, 50 years. Do we understand all there is to know? Do we know what's coming next in terms of our own lives? Are we not in the same situation in terms of having to put our trust in Jesus day after day, moment by moment? We don't know what's going to happen in the next moment. And so just as these apostles had to put place their trust in Jesus, so it is that we must do the very same. We are in that same situation. Now, having said all of those things, let's just look for a few moments at this claim that he makes. I am the way, the truth, and the life. That is an astounding claim, is it not? It's hard to absorb all the ramifications of what Jesus is saying there, but let's just make an attempt to say a few things about that. First of all, what Jesus is telling us is these things exist. There is a way that as we're trying to navigate our way through life, how many people are out there saying, what is life about? And after 10 or 20 or 30 or 70 years, they're saying, I still don't really know what it is I'm supposed to be doing. Jesus says, there is a way. There is a roadmap. We don't have to spend our lives in futility trying to figure things out. We can look to Jesus, and he provides that way. In addition to which, he says, there is truth. Someone says today, well, what's reality? How do I know what's real? There's so much misinformation out there. Who can I trust? To which Jesus says, there is truth. There is reality. God has revealed himself in his Son. And then finally, there is life. Well, what is this life about? Is it merely existence? Are we just here to breathe and to eat and to sleep? And then just do that all over again, day after day, just kind of this meaningless existence? Jesus says no, by the statement that he makes here. But I want to suggest a second thing about that statement. And that is that these things are exclusive. And that's borne out by a simple word, that definite article, the. I am the way, the truth, the life. There's a world of difference between saying I am a way and I am the way. Now let me use a simple illustration. I don't know if this makes the point that well, but I tried to think of something. If someone comes up to you and says, I know a great way to make pizza. Okay, well, we might listen to them. But if someone comes up to me and says, I know the way to make pizza, what are they saying to you? They're saying this is the way to do it. Now, I'm not all that worried about pizza making, but I'm simply trying to illustrate there's a difference between saying there are ways to go about this and this is the way, this is the truth, this is the life. That's what Jesus is telling us here. And then I want you to notice that he's not just saying, I can show you the way to these things. I can show you where truth. He says, I am the way. I am the truth. I am the personification of truth. I am life. You know, sometimes people talk about the existence of God and proving that God exists. And how do we know that God exists? And I'm not really convinced that God exists. And there are a lot of good philosophical arguments that we can cite, you know, cause, effect, things like that. But let me tell you the greatest proof that God exists. And that is that he came to this world, into our world, as flesh. John chapter 1 and verse 14. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And as we'll see in a moment, if we saw him, then we have seen God. The existence of God is not some kind of mathematical proposition that we prove by some form of deduction. It is that God came in human form and he lived among men. And the apostles said, we bear witness to that. We saw him. We heard him. He spoke to us. We touched him. And these things that we speak concerning him are true. Yes, he was put to death, but he was raised from the dead. And so Jesus says, I am those things. Now let me make a final point before we move to our last one, and that is a statement like the one that Jesus makes is what I would call countercultural. It goes against the grain of what people seem to think, especially in our time. Let's just think through the ideas that exist today. You know, there are many people who would say, well, okay, you know, if Jesus is it for you, that's great. Why, go for it. You be a devoted follower of him. As long as you don't get in my way, as long as you don't impose your values or what you believe Jesus teaches upon me, we're okay. The idea of being multicultural. There are many cultures in the world, and certainly we're aware more and more today than we've ever been because of the things that we can see right in front of us, that yes, we're not all there is. There are many other people living in many different lands. But the thinking of some is to say, well, who are you to say that what you believe and your system should be the way that others should live? In fact, the response to that is often, well, that's kind of a proud and egotistical way to look at things, like you have the truth, and that truth judges other people and what they do. And that it moves from being something that's egotistical to something that's really intolerant. You know, tolerance used to be the idea that even if I disagree with you about something, I can still treat you with dignity and respect as far as what you believe. I don't have to accept it, but I will treat you as a human being. That's not what tolerance means these days. Tolerance means that I have to accept whatever it is that you would espouse as far as what truth is, regardless of what that may be, and that no one has the right to say to anyone else, that's right or that's wrong. There are no absolutes. That's the kind of world that we live in. Let me suggest that when Jesus spoke, he spoke exclusively. He said, this is the way that it is. If you want to come to the Father, you must come through me. It doesn't matter how many believe a certain thing. It doesn't matter how long they've believed it. Truth is truth. And we must look to Jesus as the one who is the center and the source of that truth. You know, when we talk about a way, and this picture that I've used, a road going somewhere, someone might say, well, you know, there are a lot of roads to a lot of places. If I wanted to go from here to New York City, I don't have to just restrict myself to one particular road. Well, that's right. You could look at it that way. But there are many other areas in which we understand that it has to be a particular way. If you have a car that uses gasoline to drive it, what happens when you get low, when you get close to empty? Do you just say, well, it really doesn't matter? It doesn't matter what I put in there. I can put some corn syrup in there, or I can put some water in there. Why that's just as good as gasoline? Well, you know, that's going to cause problems. Or let me use the simple illustration of a password. You know what a password is? You know, when I was growing up, Password was a program that was on TV, and they had some contestants, and they would play. These days, passwords, you know, you got to have a password to get into this and to get into that. Now, let me ask you, if you set up a password for an account and you go away and you come back a couple of weeks later and you can't remember what that password is, and you get it wrong by just one letter, or maybe it's lowercase instead of uppercase, what's going to happen? You won't get access. You understand how that system works. Or use it in terms of medicine, a prescription. Doctor gives you a prescription, says, here's the dosage, here's what you need to take. Do you say, well, it really doesn't matter what pill I'm taking, just give me something. I'll take that. Doesn't work that way, does it? We understand that idea of being right and wrong, and it applies in terms of the way that we live. And that's what Jesus is claiming for himself. It's interesting to me that really, ultimately, everybody has an ultimate concern. What is important to me? It's not just those that believe in God. It's anyone who has any cause, whether it be politics or social justice or save the whales or whatever it might be. Something becomes most important to us. What Jesus is telling us is that he is the way to his Father who created the world. Well, having said those things, let's conclude with this thought. What proof does Jesus offer here? As I said, on other occasions, he fed the 5,000 or he raised Lazarus from the dead. What does he do here? Well, in verse 7, he says, if you had known me, you would have known my Father also. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. Which raises this question in Philip's mind, verse 8. Lord, show us the Father, and it is enough for us. Interesting, isn't it? Just show us the Father. And that's like the skeptic who says, well, just show me God. Just show me where he is. Give me some proof. Well, the fact of the matter is, Jesus has given a lot of proof, hasn't he? He has given proof, and he alludes to that in verse 9. Jesus said to him, have I been so long with you, Philip, and you still do not know me? Whoever has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? Do you not believe that I am in the Father, and the Father is in me? The words that I say to you, I do not speak on my own authority, but the Father who dwells in me does his works. And then listen to verse 11. Believe me that I am in the Father, and the Father is in me, because I say it, or else believe on account of the works themselves. Look at the actions of Jesus. Read about his life. Was he some kind of lunatic? Some would say, well, that's the only kind of person that would make these kind of claims. The problem with that is he doesn't act like a lunatic, does he? Was he a liar? Was he just espousing this and he knew it wasn't true? Well, the proof is that he did what he said he was going to do over and over and over again. And my suggestion would be that we consider what he has done. John's gospel is a wonderful source of those signs that John wrote down in order to convince men that Jesus is the Son of God and that believing we can have life in his name. Chapter 20, verses 30 and 31. Let me conclude this morning by saying, yes, we need to consider. We need to take this seriously. Jesus is making an extraordinary claim for himself. I am the way, the truth, and the life. You cannot come to the Father except through me. Is that a true statement? We each need to investigate ourselves. Maybe you're here in the audience this morning and you have not investigated it for yourself, and you need to. We'll help you if you need help. Start with the Gospel of John and read it. And let me have this final thought. This claim of Jesus is exclusive, yes, but there's an inclusiveness to it. And that is, Jesus doesn't bar anyone from coming to him. It doesn't matter where you're from, your social status, how much you make, what your intelligence is. Jesus says you can come if you're willing to consider his word and his teaching and follow him. If that's your desire this morning, why don't you come as together we stand.